Good day coders, in this video I'll be covering how to actually use Angular's HTTP resource. So basically here what we're going to be doing is just implementing like this UI where user can add something to cart, and when they're actually adding something to the cart it should actually decrement the number of stock left. So as they click that, that should change the products there in that cart, and then they can actually do like a search. So this search is basically we'll make an HTTP request based on whatever you're actually searching, and we'll also be covering like debounce, and all this are going to be done with the likes of Angular's HTTP resource. So if you're new to the channel, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. So now let's get to the actual code. Alright, so when we start off our application, you'll see that we basically have an empty page, right? So what we want to do is actually to retrieve all our products using our HTTP resource. So how do you do that? So we'll just use our product resource, and then we'll just use this HTTP resource, which takes in an arrow function, type string, and then that's basically what we need. And then in here we're just gonna use it coming from our dummy JSON products, right? And then this alone should then do an HTTP request, right? But if you go ahead and actually see this out, you'll see that we're actually getting like an error, right, in our console. And reason for this error is because we actually haven't set up our project to use HTTP client, right? So how we can do that in our apps config, we can just set a provider to provide this HTTP client, which is coming from this Angular comment HTTP, right? So once we do that, it should clear off that error. And now if I go to my actual products page, you will go ahead and actually see that it's actually getting those products, right? But nothing is rendered on my screen, and for obvious reasons, simply because we're actually not, we're actually returning basically like an empty array, right? So how we can actually solve that is, because we already got our products using this resource, how we get the values is we can just use this dot value. Okay, just switch that off. Okay, so we can use that dot values, right? And this also still won't show our product, and this is because if I see here, the object response that we get back has limits, products, skip, and then the total number of products, right? So how do we actually then map out to this products data? What we can do using this HTTP resource, we can have just use this object here, and then we can just use this parse, right? So in our parser we can just say our response is equal to any, but what we want from our response is actually our product, right? So some would just say products, right? And then they will just say this product is of type product. That's something you can also do, which is like an array, and then you can just return those products like that. But for in my case, I can just use this type any, right? And then let's basically see what's actually happening there. All right, so this is of type any, right? And then that should solve it. Okay, awesome. So now we see that we've got our products, but the only thing we're seeing is actually our add to cart, right? And that's because we haven't mapped up everything. So if I just do this over here, so if I go to my actual products, right, I can see that if I just check my products, I've got these images. I'm just going to take the first image out of that array, right? So I won't do those carousel type of things or these fancy stuff, right? And then I've got my title as well. So I'm going to display the title, the stock number that's left, and my actual price. That's basically what I need. And if I save this, right? You'll see that I've got like these nice products that are actually loading right here, right? So awesome. This is pretty much really awesome. So what I would wanna also now do is show you some cool stuff that you can basically use with this HTTP resource. And one of them is actually going about using your signals to add like some query parameters to your actual HTTP um, request, right? So say you want to search for a specific product over here, you probably want to call like an API that will do that for you, right? So can we actually do that, right? So we've got this input, right? So we've got this input, and in our input here, we also have this form control, right? So how we can then use this is we can just say append this form control. So this is gonna use our form control, right? And this form control is gonna take this, and you just need to make sure that you've actually imported your reactive form modules, right? Okay, that's awesome, right? But what we want to do is we'll set up like a query, right? And this query, we're gonna say this is set up to signal, right? Because what we basically want to do is we want to convert our actual observable to become a signal, right? So what observable is this? This is just going to be our input value changes. So if our value changes of that input, so if the values of the input actually changes, we're just going to change that value and basically then map it to a signal, right? So this is fine. And then I just want to show you like something really cool. So just down here, I'm just going to say signal, I'm just going to say query value, right? So my query value will just equal to this value for now, right? So if I do this, and if I say plus, then if I do this, you'll actually see something happening, right? So if I type something over here, so wait, let me just do this. Okay, so you'll see the moment I type something, you'll see that that value is actually showing, right? Okay, which is pretty much awesome, right? So what can we now do, right? So what we can do now is actually we can change our request to use like our search, right? And what we want to search is this query, right? So in our actual search, we want to search our actual query. So how we do that is we'll just use our actual query signal, but this doesn't have to be like that string like that, so we need to use those backslashes, right? And then just by using this query, what's going to happen is with every change that we're gonna with every change, well, if our signal actually changes, it's actually gonna make that HTTP request, right? So if I can just cancel my actual request, and let's see in here, so these are going to be my value changes, right? So this is just going to be that. So if I do this, okay, this is awesome. So I can also pipe. Okay, wait, that's awesome. So that sets up to an empty array. Just want to see something over here, which is pretty much awesome. So, okay, wait. So if I load this like that, okay, what is happening, right? So our query is actually set up to undefined, right? Then if I want to see, I don't want to do that. I want to set up dot okay, wait. So it's dot. So if I say pipe dot okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, awesome. I was wondering why, right? So I can say for my actual signal, right, I can just initialize my value. So for my initialized value, I just want to set it to an empty string, right? So this is just on load so that it actually doesn't set up that undefined. So if I load this page for the first time, it should set it up to an empty string, right? Okay, so now let's clear this off. What happens if I just search like essential, right? You'll see that something is actually happening over here, right? So the moment I type, right, and it's making a request, and if I type again, right, and it makes it a second request, it actually uses the switch map, which cancels the previous request, right? And that's automatically something that you just get like input from this HTTP resource API, right? So, but we don't want that, right? Because we don't want a user just, we don't want it to make requests every time we're actually typing, right? Because then that's not really good, right? So what we then want to do is actually here in our values, we might want to pipe in and then just set a debounce time to actually be, we can set it to 300, right? Or we can just make it 500. So what this will do is actually it won't make a request until you actually stop typing, right? So if you stop typing after a certain number of time, then it will just make a request, right? So now in here, if I just say that, what you'll see is that it's not basically making request every time. So if I keep on doing that, you'll see that it's not making a request until I stop typing. Then it actually then makes a request, right? So now this is basically pretty cool, right? That it's doing everything that I actually wanted to actually do, right? Um Okay, now that's awesome. So we've actually now gotten like our requests. We're now also using like a debounce, right? To say when the user actually stops typing, then it actually makes a request. So what next do I probably want to also do, right? If I add a product to cart, right? So let me just show you this. Let me just go back to this. So if I add this product to a shopping cart, well, that's gonna add that product there, right? Which essentially means that in my actual top navigation, so in my cart, I just need to change something to just show that image. So what I'm gonna change in here is basically for my images, I'm just gonna use the first image. The title should be fine, and yeah, the price should then be fine, right? So that product is added to my actual shopping cart. But another thing that I would basically want to do is update my actual products, right? And just decrement the total number of stock left after I've actually added something to my actual shopping cart, right? So how do I do that? So how I basically do that is in my actual shopping cart over here, I can just basically use that this dot product resource dot update, right? So in this update, what I'm going to do is basically this, right? So I'm going to try to find this product that I'm trying to update, right? So in my actual products, right? And then I'm just using this product ID, but what I want to change is my actual stock. So stock. Okay. Let's see. So I'm basically changing my stock. So what is it complaining about? So it's saying this is undefined, right? So this is of type products. Uh, So let's see. Okay, all right. So this, it's saying products, right? Product is undefined, and why is that the case? Let's see if it's of type products as an array. So let's see what is the actual issue over there. Okay, that is fine. Okay, no. Let's do this, right? So we are basically trying to say our actual products, right? So we're just saying our product resource dot update, right? So we're just saying our products. So we're trying to set like our actual products to something of that sort, right? Okay, interesting. So it's saying now let's do this. So it's saying this is that product or an undefined value. Oh, okay, sorry. So the reason why I'm getting that issue is because I don't have like my default value. Yeah, its default value is just going to be set up to be an empty array, and this should potentially solve my issue, right? So as products as that product, let's see. So now what is it saying? So it's basically now saying that, okay, interesting. That was really hectic. Interesting. So, okay, how I can actually now solve this is like this, right? So what I want to do is I want to find from my data, right, a specific product using that ID, and it's just decrement. So now what I want to do is just decrement that product -1, and then if there's nothing, well, if I don't find that product, I'll just basically just -1, right? Okay, so now let's just, yeah, let's try to do that, right, and see what's actually happening, right? So I've got these products. If I click on this should minus, and it should add that to my cart, and you can basically see that those changes are actually happening in here, which is pretty cool, right? So like already you can already see that this thing is actually like doing like some state management, if I can just put it that way, right? Okay, so there's also another thing that you can basically do, right? So there's a check that you can have to actually check if, let me just say here, put an h1 tag here and just say status of signal. Let me just do that. So what you can do here is actually to check like the status of your actual HTTP resource, right? So what this will do is if it gets, so let me just reload this, right? So it will say resolved, right? So the status will be resolved once you actually get data from your actual server, right? But if, let's say for instance, I just do that, it still says resolved because I'm actually getting this data from my actual server, right? But should I update this data locally in my actual client side, it should change this state to say now you've made an update to your actual client, but that update hasn't then been reflected to or you haven't made any changes to maybe the server or something, if I can just put it that way, right? So it's just local changes. So that's how you can actually check if you've actually made change locally, right? And you haven't fetched the latest data from your server. Yeah, I think that's the best explanation to explain this. And then yeah, and then we also have some cool stuff also that we can actually use with this, right? So we can just use, so there's an inbuilt, right, resource loader, right? So what this will do is, if I just, okay, wait, let me just remove all of these, right? Sometimes I hate Copilot, right? Okay, so what you can do is you can use this, right? So you can use your product resource dot is loading, right? So now gone are those times where when you do your HTTP client, you'll just need to set up a variable here which says is loading. And then when you do your HTTP, you need to say, before you do your HTTP, you'll say is loading equals to true. When you get a response, you set it to false and stuff like that. So this has like an inbuilt thing that you can basically use for this. And then, or just say else if, right? So you can just say else, else if, right? Your products resource. So if it has a value, so then you can just return this. So if it has a value and products dot is loading, oh, it's product resource dot is loading, what is loading, right? Like this is false. You can just say, maybe if your is loading is false, then you can just basically say you've actually successfully gotten your results, right? Let me just remove this. If you have values, right? Okay, this is pretty much cool. So if I do this, you'll see products are loading and then it returns my products. Okay, that's also another thing, right, that you can basically do, right? Another one would be using this else if, right? If your product resource, product resource, and then dot error. So if you've got an error, this should basically then do this and display your actual error. And then maybe else, then you just say no products found, right? So yeah, that's basically how you'd basically do this. So let's replicate this error situation, right? So say now I do this, right? So what would happen is, as it tries to actually get my actual data from my actual request, and it gets an error which is like that 404, and then this will just basically return this error. So it's got like all these nice inbuilt stuff that you can basically use, right, without you having to type in a lot of code. So it does a lot of stuff like under the hood. And yeah, so that's basically what we're going to cover for this video using this HTTP resource. So if you're new to the channel and you like this content, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now, peace.